Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending this workshop on procurement fundamentals, doing business with the City of Chicago. My name is Julie Langer. I'm an attorney for the Department of Procurement Services. Today we're going to be covering a broad range of topics that have to do with doing business with the city. If you're not familiar with doing business with local government, it's a very different process than doing business in the private sector. So I'm going to touch on a lot of different topics, and I'm going to move quickly because we have an hour, but please don't hesitate to ask me questions if you have any. I just would ask that you hold questions to the end. And I also just wanted to mention, if you do have any questions, I can answer questions generally about the procurement process and generally about the types of procurements we do. But if you're interested in a particular bid, or RFP, or RFQ, whatever the case may be, I can't answer specifics, especially if it's an open procurement, in order to ensure fairness and fair competition. So with that said, this is what we're going to cover today up on the slide. I'm going to read you our mission statement in a moment. We're going to touch on what the laws are governing our procurement process, some procurement terms that may be helpful for you to become familiar with, the types of procurement that we typically do with the city. I'm going to briefly touch on certification because we have another workshop that covers certification, and that could take a whole other hour in itself, so I'm just going to briefly touch on that. I'm going to talk about some compliance monitoring contract monitoring compliance issues that come into play if you're awarded a city contract. And I'm also going to touch briefly on our programs and incentives. There's also another workshop on programs and incentives, so we have many of them, but I do want you to be aware of them and just give you a broad overview of what we have. And I'll also point you to the DPS website, and I'll leave time for questions at the end. So I'm going to read you our mission statement. It's in the slides that you have, but it doesn't hurt to hear it. We are the contracting authority for the procurement of goods and services at the City of Chicago. We pledge to work together as a team and with our customers to guarantee an open, fair, and timely process by establishing, communicating, and enforcing superior business practices. Integrity, public trust, and the law are our guiding principles. So speaking of the law, there are two main sources we have to comply with at the city. So if you're ever wondering why we're doing crazy things, at least seemingly crazy things, it's because that we are required to, by law, to procure things in a certain way, and we're required to monitor and enforce our contracts in a certain way by law. There's a state statute, the Municipal Purchasing Act, as well as the Municipal Code of Chicago. Chapter 292 is where you will find everything procurement related if you're interested in delving in and seeing the nitty-gritty of what we have to comply with. But everything that we do comes from these two sources. So if you're looking for where we get the authority to do our incentives, 292. If you're looking for authority for how we do bids versus RFPs, 292 in the Municipal Purchasing Act. But by law, procurements generally need to be competitively procured. There's many different ways to competitively procure different types of goods and services, which I'll touch on, but for the most part, they need to have some form of competition. The reason that we do competition, even if we were required to by law, is that competition ensures that we have the best price or the best value for the city. And because we are spending taxpayer funds when we buy things for the city, we want to make sure that we're not just frivolously wasting city funds. So, procurement terms. Before I dive into some actual terminology, I just want to make sure that you are aware that when you're bidding on a project, we give you a checklist with the bid package. And the bid package is the whole set of documents that tells you what it is that we're buying. And it's really important to go through that checklist and make sure that you're giving us everything that we ask for in the checklist. Because that is something that has to do with responsiveness of a bidder. So when we're looking at a bid, we need to make sure that you're responsive, that you've checked every box, that you've signed every line, that we've asked you for certification, you've given us that certification. Otherwise, you're not considered responsive and we can't accept your bid. So I just wanted to call that out before I dive into any of the terms. We put the checklist in there to help you because we want to make sure that everyone is bidding properly so we don't have to throw your bid out for some reason. So, some actual terms. Some of these, if you've done contracting before, you may be familiar with, but it doesn't hurt to do a nice refresher. A contract is an actual written agreement between the City of Chicago and a vendor for goods, services, equipment, whatever the case may be. This is what ultimately will result after the procurement process. So once we review bids or proposals, depending on the method of procurement, we go through a process and award a contract to either the responsive and responsible bidder or proposer or respondent. There's a number of different forms of contracts. We have contracts for construction. We have contracts for professional services, such as architects and engineers. We have contracts for work services, such as landscaping or janitorial services, commodities contracts, equipment and vehicles. So we tailor our contracts by the type of goods and services we're buying. We have examples of those on our website if you're ever interested in becoming familiar with the types of terms that you would be required to comply with. I'd also recommend that if you're interested in the types of contracts we use, you can search by all awarded contracts through our website. So if you want to bid on something, you can search by that commodity. So let's say it's like, I'm trying to think of something, fuel services. You can go in and type fuel, and the fuel contracts will pop up. And you can take a look at what are the terms and conditions in the past contracts, so that you can get a sense of what it is that you're going to be seeing in the contract. So bid package. I mentioned this previously, but just going to describe it again. It's the actual set of documents that we use to solicit goods or services. So there'll be an instructions section telling you how to actually reply to the bid. They'll have a sample or, well, so if it's an RFP or RFQ, or request for proposal, request for qualifications, we'll have a sample contract. If it's a competitive bid, there will be the actual terms and conditions that you will be signing and binding yourself to if we award you a contract. We'll also have something called a specification or detailed specification, and that's where we tell you exactly what it is we're buying. So that'll list all the different requirements. If we want to buy 100 yellow shovels with red handles that can lift 50 pounds for each time you dig, it'll say that, and that's what we're expecting you to give a price for. Not a price for 50 green shovels or blue shovels. We need to have the yellow shovels with red handles. So that's what we're going to have in the bid package. An addendum is something that we use when we need to change our bid package. So if we put out a bid package for advertisement and questions come in and bidders aren't sure what it is that we want, we need to make sure that we have a means to give everyone the answer, not just the person who asked us the question, but everyone interested in that bid needs to have the same information so that when they submit their price to us, their price is based off of the same thing that everyone else is bidding on. So we'll issue an addendum. It'll either respond to questions, it'll clarify different issues in the specification that might not have been too well worded by us in the first place. It might change the due date if we decide we want to give more time. It might change the bid time, which is important because the time you submit your bid is very important. So anything we have to do to change the bid package before the date we open it, it'll be issued through an addendum. An amendment or modification is when we're changing a contract. So if you're actually awarded a contract by the city, we will do an amendment or modification to actually change it. If you're in the construction realm, you probably heard the word change order, and that's basically the same thing as an amendment or modification, just different terminology. Okay, I'm going to define these quickly because I'm going to go into detail with these different types of procurement in just a moment. But bids, the majority of our contracts are awarded through competitive bids, and that's a requirement by law. And by competitive bid, we mean low price. So we are looking for the lowest price responsive and responsible bidder. And I mentioned responsive previously is you giving us exactly what we want. So you're giving us those yellow shovels with red handles. You filled out all the paperwork we asked for. You signed where you needed to sign. You got stuff notarized. You checked the boxes you had to check. You did that, you're responsive. Responsible is whether you're actually capable of performing for the city. So do you have the financial wherewithal? Do you have the capacity to do it? Are you on our debarment list? If you are, you're not a responsible bidder. If you've ever been found ineligible to do business with us, you're not going to be allowed to bid. So we're going to consider those type of things when we're considering whether you're responsible. So if a bidder is the lowest bidder and they're responsive and responsible, they will win a competitive bid. For a request for proposals, this is used when, by law, we are not required to do competitive bid, and price is not the only issue that's important for us. It's typically used in the professional services realm. So price is one factor, but it's not the only factor. So for example, if we need some sort of customized software that has to be implemented and managed, we might not want to just buy an off-the-shelf software. We need something that's going to be customized for the city that's going to work for us, in which case getting the lowest price is not the most important thing to us. Having something that meets our needs is the most important to us, in which case we're looking for the best value. So that's when we would use an RFP. Our request for qualifications, or RFQ, is pretty similar to an RFP, but price isn't really a factor in a lot of RFQs because what we're interested in is the qualifications. Price comes in when we're negotiating a contract, But here we're going to be asking you, tell us how qualified you are. How qualified is the business? How qualified are the people who work for you? And that's how we're going to determine who's the most qualified. RFQs come into play kind of in two situations. In the A&E architectural engineering realm, especially if there's any federal funding, we're required to use RFQs for those. And price cannot be considered until we determine who is the most qualified. You'll also see RFQs for when we're making a pool of qualified consultants who will then issue task orders to throughout the course of a contract. In that case, we will take a look at all of the responses and select who are the most qualified to be a pool of contractors awarded a master consulting agreement, and they'll all be awarded contracts and then competitively bid within that pool. I'll talk about that a little bit more in detail later. So types of procurements. I mentioned competitive bids, RFPs, RFQs. There's two other that we do, small orders and job order contracting. So I'm going to start with small orders. So this is for the procurement of goods and services that are no more than $10,000, excuse me, $100,000. If it's over $100,000, even by a penny, it is going to be a competitive bid, RFP, RFQ, depending on the situation. Otherwise, we're allowed to do a small order. So there's no formal advertisement period like you'd see with a competitive bid, but we do solicit quotes. So we're going to reach out to vendors and ask them to submit quotes to us, but you're not going to see it necessarily advertised in the paper. Quotes can be solicited by telephone, fax, written quotes, or on our DPRS website. We do try to solicit from MBE, WBE certified vendors first. If there are multiple vendors who are certified in the area that we need, we'll reach out to them. And just wanted to note that MBE and WBE compliance is required for all contracts over $10,000. So if a contract's over $10,000, we're going to take a look at it. We're going to identify what specialty areas or subcontracting opportunities are available. Are there firms certified as minority or women-owned businesses? And then based on that, we will identify goals for MBEs and WBEs, and you will be required to either commit to meeting those goals or submit good faith efforts demonstrating that you've made good faith efforts to meet those goals. So I went through that briefly because small orders is a small subset of what we do. As I mentioned, the bulk of our contracting is competitive bids. Other agencies, if you do business with other government agencies, might call these invitation for bids, some variation of bids, but this is the competitive low price. This is everything over $100,000. And this is a formal advertisement process. So you will see an advertisement, Chicago Sun-Times Daily in the classified section. There'll be something in there, say public notice, City of Chicago. It'll list what it is we're buying, the due date, question date of when you're allowed to submit questions, and all host of other information. We also post them on our website in the bid and bond room, which is 103 in City Hall, the room that you're in here. And also, it's important to know that we're going to have a set time the advertisement is out there for. So it's usually 10 to 30 days. By law, it has to be at least 10 days, but it's important to keep that date in mind because if we have a date there for when the bid due date is, you have to submit your bid by that date. We will not consider it if it's late. And I'll touch on this in a moment, but there may be a deposit required for some bids. One thing to keep in mind with competitive bids is sometimes we have a pre-bid conference or a pre-bid meeting. This could include a site visit of the work, especially if you're in the construction realm. If you're going to have building something for us, we want you to see where it is that you're going to be building, or if you're going to be doing any sort of work restoring or modifying, repairing something within one of our facilities, you probably want to see what it is that the facility is that you're going to be operating in. So we'll take you out to the site and you can take a look at it. But if we have a pre-bid meeting, I strongly encourage you to attend because this is your opportunity to have face-to-face time with the procurement specialist who is responsible for running the procurement. There'll also be people there from our compliance department who can answer questions about MBE, WBE requirements. You get to go through the specifications. If you have any questions about the specs, that's a great time to ask them. And it may result in an addendum or clarification. So as I was mentioning before, we use addenda to change things. If we are in the pre-bid conference and a bunch of questions come up about what on earth do you mean about you want a shovel to do this, we'll be like, oh, I guess we weren't clear enough. We need to make sure that all bidders understand what exactly we want. So we'll issue an addendum to clear that up. Even if there is not a pre-bid meeting, we strongly encourage you, and I'll say this over and over again, we strongly encourage you to read the entire bid package. It's really important because, especially in the competitive bidding realm, the terms and conditions in the contract are the terms and conditions you are binding yourself to when you sign your bid. We're not going to change them. What's in there is what the contract will be. And we want to make sure that you understand the terms. We want to make sure that you understand what the city needs so that when you're giving us your price is based on what we're asking for. So please read through. If you have questions, there will always be someone identified in the bid package of who you can go to for questions. And there's typically a question period, which is our cutoff for when we'll accept questions. So if you have them, make sure you get the questions in time because we want to help, we want to answer your questions so that you can make an informed bid. Some other information about bid documents. I told you I can be a little repetitive with this, but fill in all the required information. So if we have a box that says you need to fill this in, fill it in. If there's something that says you need to have it notarized, get it notarized. If you have to sign something, check who has to sign something. If it says the president has to sign something, you can't have an assistant manager sign it. You have to have the president sign it, or you have to tell us why your company has authorized someone else to sign than that person. So that's all important stuff to pay attention to, because we really don't want to have to throw out a bid for being non-responsive because you didn't read through it and you missed that you had to sign somewhere or you fill something in. And I mentioned bid bonds and deposits briefly. So you typically would only see these in construction, but just wanted to make sure you're aware of them. A bid bond or deposit may be required for some bids. This is typically for high-value bids where the city has a tight timeline, where we're at a lot of risk if bidders are going to be withdrawing their bids after they submit them. And in order to protect the city's interests, we may require a bid fee or bid bond, no more than 10% of your bid that we'll hold on to. We typically will only hold on to the top 3 bidders. Everyone else will be returned. So we can make sure that we have a responsible bidder that we can award a contract to, and no one's going to pull their bid from us. If we do ask for one, you need to submit it in the proper form. We typically will accept a bond by surety within, the surety authorized to operate in the state of Illinois. Cashier's check. Trying to remember what else we accept off the top of my head, but I can't remember right now. But I do know that cash is not accepted, so you can't come in here with cash and hand it to us. We will not accept it. And then probably the most important thing I can say about submitting bids is they have to be timely. We will have a bid date and time for bids of when they're due, and they have to be submitted by that time. If they are late, your bid is going to be thrown out and we're not going to consider it. The reason we do that is because bid openings occur on a daily basis in this room, bid and bond room, City Hall 103, and we read out all bids. So we will open them, they will read them out, they will tabulate them, meaning we're going to put the bids in order of who highest bid, lowest bid. We're going to review the bids for accuracy. We're going to do a quick responsiveness check to make sure that nothing's missing and we can actually accept the bids. And then we try to get them posted in 24 hours, the bid tabs, which lists all the bidders and the bid prices. Can't guarantee that that's always our goal. It depends on if there's something complicated going on with the bids, but that's what we try to do. They'll be available on our website, so you can automatically go onto our website once they're posted and you can see exactly what everyone else bid on the project. And that's available for old bids or old procurements too. So if you're interested in knowing who the bidders were on whatever the last project, so if you're interested in bidding on something now and you want to know who bid on the last one, you can search it and you can pull it up and you can see. Granted, the pricing will be several years old, but you can kind of get an idea for who's in that industry. It's a great opportunity too if you're looking for subcontracting opportunities. You can see who the bidders are and you can reach out and say, hey, this is coming up for the city. Are you bidding again? I'm a sub. Are you interested in working with me? So our award process. Getting a contract awarded with the city can be a timely process. And I understand it can be a frustrating process because of how long it is, but we try to move it as quickly as possible. But there are a number of people who have to review and sign off on contracts before they can be awarded. The chief procurement officer has to sign off on it. The mayor's office has to sign off on it. The comptroller has to sign off on it. So there's a lot of different people who have to sign on contracts. The Department of Law and DPS's legal unit also take a look at them to make sure that we're awarding contracts that we should be. So this is generally the process it goes through. So we make a determination about responsiveness and responsibility. The user department will take a look at the bids and say, ABC Corp is the low bidder, they're responsive and responsible, please award a contract to them. And then we will accept that bid, we will package it, and we will route it for signature cycle, is what we call it. So that is when we route for everyone to sign off on the contract. If there's a performance and payment bond required for the work, we're going to need to have the performance and payment bond before we can have a contract awarded. Same thing with insurance. If there's insurance requirements and they're not required, a certificate of insurance isn't required at the time of bid, you're going to need to give us an insurance certificate showing that you can provide the insurance needed before we award you a contract. So after all of those steps, then we're going to award a contract to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder who's meeting our specifications. So that in a nutshell is our competitive bid process. As I said, the majority of our majority of our contracts are awarded through competitive bids, but there are some situations where the law allows us to use other methods of competitive solicitation. So RFPs, or request for proposals, is one of them. I mentioned previously, this is usually in the professional services realm. It's typically used when the city doesn't have in-house experts. So we don't have people on staff who are actually capable of performing this. Perfect example is what I said previously. If we need some sort of customized software, as much as I'm sure the city would love to have a team of dedicated software engineers to develop whatever we need, we just don't. And it wouldn't be a good source for the city to have a bunch of people on staff who's only going to need to every now and then build something. So we'll do an RFP, a request for proposal to procure a company to actually do that for us. We're going to define the objectives and the scope of services. We're going to tell you what we want. It's not necessarily going to detail every aspect of what we want, because typically we're looking for whoever's submitting a proposal to tell us how you're going to meet our needs. And we're going to have this rather than just a low price and taking opening bids and taking whoever submitted the lowest one. An evaluation committee is going to review all of their proposals. And in the bid package, or excuse me, in the RFP, we will list what the evaluation criteria are. So typically the types of evaluation criteria you're going to see are how qualified are you? Do you have experience doing the same type of work? Who is your staff? Who's going to be working on it? Price is one factor, but not the only one. Often we'll take a look at what's your financial wherewithal? Do you take any exceptions to our terms and conditions? Because that's going to impact whether or not the city is going to be able to award you a contract. So that's the type of thing that we're going to look at in the evaluation criteria, but you will know when you're submitting a proposal what we're evaluating based on. And proposals are going to be ranked and rated on who is the best value for the city based on those evaluation criteria. And the highest rated and ranked proposer is going to be invited for negotiations and then ultimately awarded a contract if negotiations are successful. Requests for qualifications, I touched on this before, but just to dive in again, this is used to solicit qualifications for companies who have a high degree of technical expertise. So I say A&E a lot because we use this for architectural and engineering contracts quite frequently, and if it's federally funded, we have to do that. We also will use this to pre-qualify pools of qualified consultants. And I mentioned task orders previously. Task orders are almost like mini contracts. So we will evaluate qualifications, and then we will decide who are the most qualified consultants who submitted responses, and then we will award a master consulting agreement to them. And the master consulting agreement simply means that you are pre-qualified and you are allowed to bid on task orders and submit proposals for task orders. And then when we have actual projects come up, we will issue a task order specifically saying what it is we need you to do under the general scope of your MCA. And you will submit a proposal for it, and then we'll award a task order based on that process. But the evaluation process is purely based on your qualifications. As I mentioned, how qualified your company is, how qualified your staff are. That's the kind of thing we're looking at. We want to make sure that we have the best qualified companies and people doing work for us so we get the best results. Job order contracting is a little complicated. And this just has to do with construction. So JOC contracts, job order contracting, it's a firm fixed price, competitively bid, indefinite quantity contract. So these are specifically designed for each department's needs. So you will often see a Department of Aviation will have a JOC contract, Department of Water Management will have a JOC contract, Chicago Department of Transportation will have a JOC contract. So they'll each have a contract based on what their needs are. This is usually used for small and medium-sized projects. If we have a large project, we're going to do a competitive bid versus a jock contract, just to ensure the best competition. But the reason departments like to use this is because instead of bidding out every small project using a competitive bid process, which could be a timely process, we can use this jock contract process, which is a lot faster because prices are based on a price book. So typically, there will be a pre-priced list of different categories of work that are going to be needed throughout the project. And you're bidding a markup, basically, off of those prices. Or an adjustment, I think, is the correct terminology. So you're gonna bid your adjustment to those your prices, and that's how the work is decided. Excuse me, the award is decided. I don't want to get too much into the weeds on jock contracts, but just wanted to make sure you're aware that's another type of contracting that we do. The value is going to depend on the budget of the department. Typically, there will be a minimum contract value, and a maximum potential contract value, but there's no guarantee with jock how much work you're going to get because it's going to depend on what the department's needs are. Ooh, it's warm in here. So those are our methods of contracting that we typically use. There are some other situations where if there is just one bidder out there that has a patent or a copyright or something that means that we're only allowed to work with them, or there's just nobody else out there, we can do a sole source contract, but we try to use competition whenever possible. So I'm going to shift gears and just talk about some of the other issues that have to do with contracting with a city. Economic disclosure statements, it's something that's required by law. It addresses the ownership of the firms that are bidding on our projects. The reason we ask for this is we need to make sure that the firms that are doing business with us are responsible. There's no conflicts. There's no contributions to campaigns that are prohibited by law, that there's no firms out there that want to do business with us that are debarred by other entities or have been terminated for cause, which makes us question whether they're responsible. So that's the kind of thing that you're going to be reporting in your EDS. But it's not just the company who's actually contracting with us themselves. We also need to know the ownership breakdown of their owners. So if you are owned by two firms 50-50, both of those firms need to submit an EDS to us as well as you. If your firm is owned 5% and 95%, the 95% firm doesn't, or does, but the 5% wouldn't based on this requirement. So just keep that in mind, because if you're submitting an EDS and you say you have owners, we're going to take a look and say, okay, did you submit EDSs for those owners? Because we're going to try to chase ownership back as far as we can. This is ultimately to protect the city's interests. Okay, certification. So I don't know who was here for the certification workshop before this, but I'm just going to briefly touch on this because we can spend a whole hour on this, and I don't need to keep you here all afternoon. We have 6 types of certification at the city. We have minority-owned business enterprises, women-owned business enterprises owned or operated by people with disabilities, disadvantaged business enterprises, airport concession disadvantaged business enterprises, and veteran-owned business enterprises. So for BEPDs, business enterprises owned or operated by people with disabilities, and VBEs, veteran-owned business enterprises, certification is important for those 2 types because we have bid incentives that you may be eligible for if you meet these criteria in order to be eligible for certification. You can apply for those bid incentives. And I'll talk about those later, but you have to be certified in order to get the incentive. For DBE and ACDBE, that comes into play with federally funded contracts. There are federal regulations requiring DBE and ACDBE goals on federally funded contracts. And WBE comes into play for city-funded projects. The eligibility requirements are generally the same. The businesses have to be at least 51% owned by eligible individuals, so MBE, minorities, WBE, women, and whatnot. So that's just one factor, though, the 51%. But it also has to be an economically disadvantaged individual for the most part, meaning of those 51%, you typically, at least in the construction realm in DBE, you can't have your personal net worth limit, have your personal net worth exceed a certain limit set by our MBE rules or the DBE rules. The business also has to be a small business. And businesses also have to be independent and viable. meaning that you're not relying on another company in order to run your business, that you're not relying on, if you're applying for a WBE certification and you're 51% owned, but you have 49% ownership by a group of men who are actually day-to-day running your company, that's not really being an independent company owned by women. That's a company that is ultimately being run by men. So that's an example of something that we look for. And viability is, are you actually in business? Are you offering your services? Do you actually have equipment you need to do your business? Do you have the ability to get the equipment? Do you have a business plan showing how you're planning on doing that? That's the kind of thing we look for. If you're interested in certification, I highly encourage you to attend our workshop or listen to one of the pre-recorded workshops on certification, or contact our certification unit because they can help you out with that. The reason I wanted to touch on certification is just because I'm going to go into some of the requirements for compliance on our contracts with MBE WBE goals, but just briefly, this is where the authority comes from these programs and all the rules for the programs. 292-420 is our non-construction MBE WBE program. 292-650 is where you can find the construction program. And 49 CFR Part 26 is where you can find the DBE rules. So if you're interested in learning all the specifics of these programs, those are the great resources to go to. So MBE WBE Participation. Generally, this is the same for DBE, but I'm focusing on MBE WBE for the purposes of these slides. On any contract over $10,000, we will generally have MBE WBE goals on those projects. They are typically project specific. We're going to take a look at how many firms are certified in the different subcontracting opportunities out there, or the main area that we're procuring. If there are at least 3 firms that are certified, then we're going to be able to set goals. If there's not, there's no competition. So we don't want to turn this program into you have to contract with this firm because they're the only one certified. We want this to be there are multiple firms out there. Go solicit business from our firms that are certified in these specialty areas and provide opportunities. They're goals though, so if you are not able to meet the goals, you can submit good faith efforts, meaning that you have actually tried to meet the goals. So it's not enough just to say, oh, I couldn't do it. If the goals were 25 and 5, but I'm going to do 10 and 1. You need to show us how you got there. So who did you contact? Did you reach out to our assist agencies? Did you actually solicit MBs and WBs who are certified? How many times did you do? Did you do an ad? What efforts did you do to actually try to meet our goals? If you can demonstrate that you did, then we will say you've met good faith efforts to meet the goals. But it's an important thing to pay attention to. In order to receive participation for the use of an MBE WBE, the firm has to be certified in the area that they're performing. So they can't just be certified in anything. They have to be certified in that specific area. And they have to perform a commercially useful function. So commercially useful function, what does that mean? That means that they're actually performing the work. So they are on the job site. They are doing the work. They're actually performing. They're managing it. They're supervising it. They're fulfilling their responsibilities if it's a joint venture. So what we will really look for is we want to avoid having any sort of pass-through where you have a firm listed in your compliance plan as, oh, I'm going to subcontract with Julie's Inc. because she's a WBE and I'm going to give her 25% of the work. But then Julie's Inc. subcontracts with another company, Joe's Business Corp., and Joe's Business Corp. Is doing all the work. You're not going to get credit for that because Julie's Inc. is the one that needs to actually perform the contract. So please make sure when you are filling out compliance plans, you're checking to make sure that the firms on there are actually certified by the city or Cook County and that they are going to be performing a commercially useful function on your contract. So once you submit a compliance plan to us, if we award you a contract, that compliance plan means that you are committing to meet those goals. So you are committing to have whatever percentage performed by a minority or women-owned business. And you cannot get a reduction or waiver of that unless you come to the CPO and explain why you need it. It's not something we just do. You have to prove to us what the circumstances were. So if you had a certain firm on your compliance plan and they went out of business, nobody else is certified in that area, you really can't find anybody else, that's a reasonable situation where we're willing to understand and work with you. If you just don't like who you're working with anymore, that's not a good reason. We need to know why, that you committed to providing a certain percentage of the work to a firm, and then you're just not going to do it anymore. So we take this very seriously, and there's penalties associated with it. So if you don't meet your commitments, there are shortfall penalties, the difference between what you committed to and what you actually paid. So that's under special conditions. Again, why I encourage you to read the entire bid package, because the special conditions are in there and they tell you exactly what the consequences are if you do not comply. So just please keep in mind, if you don't think you can meet your goal before you're bidding, come to us ahead of time and show us good faith efforts and tell us what you actually can do. If you're in the contract and something is happening that might affect your ability to meet your compliance plan, come and talk to us. We'll try to work with you. I don't want to scare anybody, but I want to make sure it's an important program to us, and we want to make sure that the firms that are certified and provided opportunities are actually benefiting from it. Some other compliance monitoring issues and contract monitoring issues. So we monitor MBE, WBE compliance throughout the course of the contract, but we also ensure requirements with other aspects such as Chicago residency ordinance and the equal opportunity commitments. So Section 292-330 of the Municipal Code of Chicago has a requirement that for all construction contracts over $100,000, at least 50% of the total work hours have to be performed by Chicago residents, and 7.5% of the total work hours have to be performed by project area residents. So in any city-funded construction project over $10,000, you will see a map in the project specifications. The map will have highlighted areas showing you what are the project areas. If it's not a map, it'll be a verbal description of what the project areas are. So what we're going to look for is at the end of the contract, you have to show us that 7.5% of the total labor hours were actually performed by individuals who reside within those project areas for the city. So this is something we actually check and verify, and by ordinance there are penalties if you do not comply. So that's something that we're responsible for. Equal employment opportunity, we encourage our contractors to employ minorities and women in various positions throughout their business and performing on city work, but this particular slide, what I'm talking about, has to do with construction. So city-funded construction projects over $100,000, we have a part of your bid, there's going to be an award criteria or figure, a determination or canvassing formula that's factored in when we look at what the low bid is. And how we get to that is that you as the bidder are going to make a commitment to utilize minorities and women, journey workers, laborers, and apprentices for various categories of work. So based on those commitments, your bid will be reduced artificially, purely for the purposes of bid evaluation. This is kind of a really simplistic description of how it works, but if you make commitments, and they're voluntary, you don't have to do it. So, but if you do put in your bid that I am going to have 25% of the labor hours performed by minority journey workers, or I'm trying to come up with examples, 5% will be women apprentices. At the end of the contract, we're going to ask you, prove to us that you did this. And you're going to have to show us that I hired these individuals, they are minorities, they are journey workers, they perform this much work. And there are penalties for not complying. So if you can do it, great, we want you to, we really want to encourage it. But please make sure that you are keeping that in mind when you're soliciting, or completing your bid, that we want to make sure that you are actually meeting your commitments. So just touching on ways to achieve compliance with MBE, WBE, DBE goals. We talked about this briefly, but just to summarize again, the prime contractor can be the MBE, WBE, or DBE. If you are a prime contractor, you're self-performing all of the work, great, you've met your requirements, that's lovely. You can joint venture with an MBE, WBE. If you do, there's a Schedule B in the compliance plan, so you're going to have to submit that as well as your joint venture agreement and tell us how the work's going to be broken out. And we will give MBE, WBE credit for the amount of work performed by the MBE or WBE joint venture partner. You can also subcontract out a portion of the work. So you can have as many subs, you can have as many tiers of subs as you want. We're going to give you credit for the certified firms that are performing commercially useful functions. Or purchasing materials from MBE, WBE is the final way you can get credit. So reporting requirements, this is generally how we monitor and are able to tell if you're meeting your requirements. Prime contractors are required to submit monthly subcontractor payment certification forms so that you're actually showing us you're paying your subs on time. Weekly certified payrolls, especially in construction, so we know that your workers are being paid on time, who's on your job site, who's actually getting the work. And waivers of lien. Certified payrolls and waivers of lien, this is typically in construction because we want to make sure that our subs are being paid, that the work is free and clear, and that we're not going to have any liens on our work after the project is completed. Programs and incentives. So there's a lot of information on this slide because we have a lot of programs and incentives. And I do another workshop just on these programs and incentives because there's a lot of requirements for them. But I just want to kind of briefly go through them in case you have any interest in these. So we have a small business initiative, SBI program for construction. So this is contracts that are no more than $3 million. If the user department identifies an opportunity that's appropriate for small businesses, we will do an SBI contract, which is exclusive to small businesses. There's two tiers. There's one tier that's up to $2 million and another tier up from $2 to $3 million. If it's up to $2 million, you can be no more than half of the size standards that you would need to be certified as an MB or WB firm. If it's the up to $3 million, you can be no more than the size standard you would need to be for certified. And by that I mean your gross receipts limit is no more than what the SBA size standard for that particular area of work that you operate in. And the owner's personal net worth does not exceed the personal net worth limit if you were trying to be certified. It's a race gender neutral program, so anyone who's a small business and eligible can bid on these projects, but only small businesses can bid. MBI is a similar program, mid-sized business initiative. So this is in the construction realm as well. You have to be a mid-sized business. So this is between $3 and $20 million in contract estimated value. There's two tiers, 3 to 10 and 10 to 20. Ultimately, you can be no more than 2 times the size standards you would need to be certified. So, and again, this is a race gender neutral program. So if you're a mid-sized business, if it's an MBI project and you meet the eligibility requirements, you can bid on this, but no large firms can. And we also have a similar program for non-construction, which is $3 to $10 million in estimated contract value. Diversity Credit Program. This is a program that it encourages our prime contractors to utilize MBs and WBs, not just on city work, but private sector work. So if you're a prime contractor and you do both city and private work, and you decide you're going to use MBEs and WBEs on the private work, even if you're not required to on that project, we will give you a credit towards your MBE, WBE requirements on a city project for $1 for every $3 you spend on the private contract, up to a maximum of 5%. So potentially, if a goal is 25% MBE, you could earn up to 5% on the private sector contract and transfer it over to the public sector contract. If you're interested, please refer to our website for more information, or you can come talk to me or email me. I'd be happy to explain how that program works. The target market program is only for non-construction, and if a project is designated as a target market project, you have to be a certified firm. So only MBEs and WBEs can bid on these projects. Target market, so it's non-construction only.
Manufacturer, supplier would be maybe desks or things like that for school?
So, well, CPS would buy anything for schools. So the city doesn't purchase for the Chicago schools, but chairs, desks, pencils, pens, any sort of commodity. When I say construction, it's really just building things for us. Everything else is we consider non-construction. So professional services, work services, commodities, that's all falls into non-construction. With target market, a lot of times, especially with professional services, you'll see on our website that we award pools of master consulting agreements. We'll have a non-target market pool and we'll have a target market pool. So we'll have a pool that's dedicated to certified firms and a pool that's dedicated to anyone that's interested in bidding. Mentor Protege Program, this is a great program. I help administer it, so I always like to talk about it. We really want to encourage firms to mentor and to pull up small businesses that are just developing and help them get a start. The way this program works is if you agree to enter into a formal mentor-protege agreement with a certified minority or women-owned firm, you can be eligible for a 1% incentive on the bid. And by incentive, I mean it's an artificial price reduction for your bid. So your bid will be reduced 1% when comparing it to other bidders. And you can also earn participation credit for using that MBE and WBE on your project, meaning you can potentially have additional credit applied towards meeting your goals for MBE, WBE goals. This is a great program. We've seen some increased interest in it lately, and we're trying to get the word out. So if you have any interest in participating, I'd be happy to talk about it in more detail. Phased graduation program. This is a program, so when you're a certified firm, there are, in the construction certification program, personal net worth limits for certain owners and gross receipt limits for the size of your business. If you exceed those, you're too big to participate. So if you're too big from the get-go, you can't be certified at all. But if you're in the program and you grow, which is the whole goal of the MBE, WBE program, you're going to graduate. But we don't want to just throw you to the wolves and say, okay, goodbye, thanks for participating. We have a phased graduation where in the first year, you get 75% credit for your work rather than 100%. In the second year, you get 50% credit. And in the third year, you get 25% credit. So it helps firms ease their way out through graduation rather than just terminating the participation in the program. At any point during the phased graduation program, if you go below those size standards, you can apply again to be part of the program. At the end of the program, if you, again, are below those size standards, you can reapply. It's not a graduate, and then you can never participate again. So those are our programs. And I realize we're running short on time, so I'm going to just quickly say these are our incentives. We have a lot of them. They're really great. I encourage you to check them out. The way bid incentives work is when you bid, if you are eligible and you submit an affidavit saying you meet the eligibility requirements that you're committing to do, whatever it is we're asking you to do to be eligible for the incentives, we're going to reduce your bid by a certain percentage. So for example, with the veteran-owned subcontractor utilization incentive, for city-funded construction contracts, if you are going to be using veteran-owned subcontractors who are certified by the city as VBEs, you can commit to utilizing them for a certain percentage of the work, and then based on that percentage, we will give you a bid incentive, reducing your bid. So let's say you are eligible for a 2% incentive through that. Your bid will be 2% lower when we're comparing it to all others. So it's a great incentive if you're eligible. For city-based businesses, there's 3 different levels. Oh man, I keep seeing city-based business, and I need to fix that on this slide. City-based business. There's 3 levels. You are eligible for a 4% incentive if you're a city-based business. So you are based in Chicago. The majority of your full-time workforce is in Chicago. 6% if, the first one is if you are a city-based business, your full-time office, the office where the majority of your operations occurs is in the city. 6% is if the majority of your workforce are city residents. And then 8% if the majority of those city residents live in socioeconomically disadvantaged areas, which we define for you. The way we determine whether you're eligible for the last 2 is we require you to tell us who your employees are and where they live, and we verify their addresses. But 8% incentive is a very high incentive, which is a great competitive advantage if you're a city business. So we have a number of them. One new one that's not on the list is a diverse workforce and management incentive. If you have a diverse workforce, if you have a diverse management up to certain percentages, you can be eligible for a bid incentive as well. It's, I'm sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head. It's a relatively new one, but it's a relatively high incentive. It's one of our higher ones. I encourage you to check it out and see if you're eligible for it. All of our bid packages have all the instructions on how to apply for these bid incentives. So if you're interested, please apply. And if you have any questions in advance, you just want to know more, feel free to reach out to us because we're always happy to talk about our programs. Okay, so just want to talk about our website for a minute because it is a great source of information. We have all of our awarded contracts and modifications are uploaded to our website. It is a mission of our department to be as transparent as possible. We want to make sure that Anyone who's interested, who's doing business with us, can look it up and see. So all of our contracts and all the modifications are up there. All the payments we make under our contracts are reported and they're posted on our website. All the bid tabs, when we do bid openings, we put those on our website. You can see who's bid on everything that we bid. Weekly bid opportunities, that's available on our website. We have a directory of all certified firms. So if you're bidding on something, you need to find firms in order to meet the goals. We have a directory you can search through. You can search by firm name, commodity, whatever the case may be in order to find firms. All of our rules for the bid incentives and programs I talked about, they're on our website. And we also have our regulations for certification on our website. So there's a lot of great information. And I encourage you to check it out if you want to become more familiar with the city's procurement department. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube. You can look up past workshops on a variety of topics. They're also live streamed. You can get our workshop schedule. We're on Twitter. Trying to remember what else we have. Okay, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and we have our website most importantly. So thank you all for listening. I know I just ran through that real fast in a real warm room, and I covered a lot of topics. So I appreciate you all sitting in and listening. If you have any questions, I have a microphone I can pass around, so I'm happy to answer anything that you guys might have. If I can turn it on. Anybody?
Can you please talk about a responsible bidder? How do you recognize that? With somebody, let's say somebody with past experience with City of Chicago, like just being a general contractor without any like private firm, not contracting the city, but let's say bankrupt after that. Is it still going to be responsible bidder? How do you classify?
It's really going to depend on the circumstances. So we're never going to look at someone and say, oh, you've never done city work, you're not responsible, or you've only done city work, you're not responsible. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to look to see if the company's been debarred, meaning we've determined that you are not eligible to do business with the city. There's a list posted on the website of companies we can't do business with. If you're not on that list, the next thing we're going to look at is we will look at your financial wherewithal. So we typically ask for financial statements because we want to make sure that the firms that we're doing business with are not just going to go out of business in the middle of the contract. Basically, it's to protect our city's interest, but it is a case-by-case analysis. So if we have questions, we would typically reach out to the vendor if we have questions throughout that determination process. But generally, we're looking at protecting the city's interests and making sure that the contractor is actually going to be capable of performing throughout the course of the contract. So that's the analysis we're doing when we're considering.
And for the small contracts, for the small orders, like less than $10,000, you do the same thing?
Yes. Yeah, we're required by law to award contracts to responsive and responsible bidders. So we'll do that analysis.
So is that analysis subjective, like to the person who is doing the review?
Well, it's not a subjective we review all bids the same way in that everyone is going to have to meet the same requirements in order to be determined responsible. So if one bidder were saying, oh, it's okay, we don't mind that this happened to you, that means that we're going to apply that across the board. We're not going to just like pick and choose who's responsible and who's not responsible based off of whatever someone decides. So.
And you mentioned the small orders are not advertised, but are they advertised on the website that you just mentioned?
So I believe we put them on our website, but I don't think we advertise them in the Sun-Times. Typically, a procurement specialist who's assigned to the project will reach out and solicit bids from vendors who we know are operating in the area that we're trying to procure. And we'll reach out and say, here is what we're trying to procure, give us your quote.
So if somebody, let's say, already registered with a woman enterprise, you would directly solicit somebody if you're looking for small jobs, small orders?
I believe we typically try to solicit from certified firms who are certified in the areas of specialty applicable to the small order. We'll reach out to them and ask them for quotes. I can't guarantee that we'll reach out to every firm, but I know that is typically how we run small orders.
So would you recommend, in order to find job, like for the small businesses which are just starting, let's say, and they got some kind of certification in minority, instead of bidding directly with the city, maybe just going to be a subcontractor in the, for the general contractor who will get the job?
Sure. I mean, I don't want to discourage new firms from bidding on work if you think you're capable of performing it and you think you can do it for a fair price, submit a bid. There's no reason why you shouldn't. But if you are looking to get experience and you think you might have a capacity issue on a project, subcontracting opportunities are a great way to get your foot in the door. I always encourage firms when they're looking for subcontracting opportunities to come to our outreach events. I believe on February 6th we have a construction summit coming up. It's a great way to meet other firms that are in the industry. I think we typically have like a meet and greet between primes and subs. Take a look at the bid package, or excuse me, the buying guide, because that gives you an estimate of when we're trying to buy certain things. It's not a guarantee that we're going to put a bid out exactly when we say we are, but that's roughly what we're considering. And then take a look at who was awarded the last contract, who bid on the last contract, and you can reach out and say, and tell them who you are. Say you want to talk to them about subcontracting opportunities. So.
The mentor protege program, is that for like primes working with smaller, I'm a manufacturing supply company, WBE, MBE, right here in the city, so I meet a tremendous amount of the criteria.
So there's two different ways you can participate. So a prime can mentor an MBE, WBE sub, or a subcontractor can mentor another sub. So if a subcontractor is an MBE and agrees to mentor a second-tier sub or another sub who is a first-tier sub, you can participate that way. But ultimately, we want to make sure is that a firm, whoever's the mentor is actually providing mentoring to them. That typically we look for, are you giving advice about how to structure your finances? Or are you getting advice about how to build your business, about how to find contracting opportunities? Because what the purpose of the program is we want to help see minority and women-owned businesses grow and develop, find new areas of specialty. So that's why we have the program. So,
and that incentive for that prime, what is the percentage that they're going to get?
So it's a 1% incentive, and then there's also participation credit, but it's a 0.5% for every 1% that the protege is used on the contract.
For every 1%?
Yes, but there is a cap. It can be it's no more than 5%.
Okay,
I believe.
up to 1. Okay, up to 5.
So do you have to qualify to be a protege?
If you are a certified firm and you're actually capable of performing work in the area of the contract that they're subcontracting to you, then you can be a protege. There's no, the requirements is that you're actually committed to participating in the program. So you're not just signing paperwork saying I'm in it. You're meeting, you're working together, that you're learning from a mentor. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah.
So.
And then the city
program, so just continue your question. Is it on the website?
Yep. So we have the guide to bid incentives and programs on the wall outside the room, and it's also on our website too, which is a kind of an overview of all our programs. I will say we're in the process of updating it because there's been a couple tweaks, but the mentor protege program is generally, that's the same. So you can take a look at that, or we have our actual rules posted on the website as well.
Okay, and then the last thing, the city-based manufacturer, what's the incentive on that? Again, because that's going to apply to me as a manufacturer.
I wish I could remember this off the top of my head. I think it might be 1%. I have to check the rules off the top of my head because I do not remember that one. I apologize.
Okay. So whatever bid I'm giving in, you're going to deduct 1% off of that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's just for evaluation purposes. Whatever you bid is the price or the value of the contract.
Right, but every bid helps. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I have one nice question.
Okay. We'll work the mic over to you.
I just want to ask, can the vendor apply for multiple bids, and is there a cap?
There's no cap on how many bids you bid on. I just do want to say that when you're submitting a bid, you're making a commitment that if you're the low bidder, we're awarding you a contract and we expect you to perform. So I would recommend not bidding on more than you're capable of performing. So think about, if I was awarded all these contracts, could I do it? So.
With respect to navigating the DPS website, they seem to, you have made some changes in the last few months, and everything seems to be moving toward bidding electronically and getting all your information electronically. Is there a class now, and or will there soon be a class to help navigate all these changes?
For e-procurement?
And navigating the DPS website
Yes.
tomorrow.
Okay. Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and e-procurement class, I think I want to say it's on the 23rd or the 24th of January.
Yeah, I think we have our
do have
workshop
it in the
scheduled
schedule,
here.
on the schedule.
So, but yeah, we have a separate workshop just explaining how to do e-procurement, because I shouldn't say all, but majority of our construction and the majority of our commodities contracts are now being done through e-procurement. And the goal,
Ultimately, this seems to be the goal, right?
the goal is to move everything to e-procurement, and it's a new system, and we realize that it's a learning curve for a lot of our vendors, so we have the workshop, and we have a dedicated team for e-procurement that if you have questions, we can refer you to, so.
You can take a second and fill out that evaluation, and you can hand it to me. I greatly appreciate it.
Jackie, do you have any more